If you're anything like me, when I was early in my nice guy recovery, you have a hard time setting boundaries. This is especially true with women. I mean, we tend to let pretty women walk all over us. We're afraid that if we set a boundary, she's going to walk away. Over the years, I've worked with hundreds of nice guys, and I've noticed that we struggle with boundaries, and we struggle with boundaries, especially when it comes to the women in our lives. Now, I used to think boundaries were negative, and they would because they were rigid. And if I set a boundary with somebody, I was being selfish. And if I was being selfish, they weren't going to like me. And if they didn't like me, they were going to leave me. And that's why I became a nice guy. And then one day I heard Dr. Glover say this. It was really profound. He said, boundaries are an act of love. Now, this threw me because I couldn't see how love and boundaries went together. But when he explained it, he said that when we set a boundary, we're letting other people know what we will accept and what we won't. And without boundaries, there's no love, especially love for yourself. And if you can't respect yourself enough to have limits, how can you truly love others? Welcome to the Nice Guy Show. My name is Chuck Chapman, and I'm here today with my host, Faisal Koker and Ari Graff. And we're nice guys who, or rather, we're former nice guys who help nice guys transform into integrated men. Our mission is to help men develop confidence and the skills to get past the things that are holding them back so that they can get the love, the sex, and the success that they desire. Now, boundaries are a personal limitation. They let other people know what is acceptable and what's not. And many nice guys, like I said, struggle with boundaries, and especially when it comes to dealing with women. We're afraid of being rejected. But if you really need to be approved all of the time, then you're going to have a difficult time setting boundaries. And this is going to affect your partner, and it's going to affect you, and it's going to affect your relationship. So today I want to talk about boundaries. Um, so first question I have for you guys, Ari and Faisal, like, why do you think nice guys have such a difficult time with boundaries? And what about you? What's your experience been with boundaries and setting boundaries? Easy, hard, difficult? What's your story? Faisal, let's start with you.
So boundaries, this is again a new concept when I got into personal development, growth, understanding relationships, and boundaries was something really new to me as well. And deep diving into this, our first experience of boundaries is when we're kids. It's you step outside the house, and I've done this as a parent myself. It's cold. Well, I'm not cold. Well, put a jacket on. No, and you're saying no, and your parents enforcing what they're experiencing. They might be cold, you might not be, and they say you put a jacket on, and you're thinking, no, I'm not cold right now. And that's a violation of how very subtle, but a violation of boundary from childhood, and that carries on as we get older. And one of my experiences of boundaries, I had none. I had none because most people, including nice guys, what they lack is deep rooted principles and virtues. So what you'll notice that people who have no strong principles have no boundaries. And that was the thing when it came to my health, it came to my relationships, it came to my parenting. There was no strong principles I had. And it's only when you have strong principles can you know where you stand. So for example, I have established some boundaries, and what women have told me is they hate it, but yet they find it so attractive and sexy. So one of the boundaries I have is, when I'm not traveling or I'm not out and about, I won't use my phone after 10 p.m. So if I'm talking to a girl and and I'll say, hey, after 10 p.m., I switch my phone off. That's it. And they hate that, but they also respect that because they know that that boundary is in place for welfare. It's for good. There might be other boundaries regarding health, my kids, relationships. One of the things I have with boundaries is that I'm not going to tolerate anybody who is a drug addict or something. I wouldn't get into a relationship with a person. I wouldn't get into a relationship with somebody who has really poor outlook on life. That's a boundary. That's a non-negotiable. So that's what boundaries are for me. They're non-negotiable, and they start and stem because I started to build strong principles.
Right. What about you, Ari?
Yeah, I mean, I think my difficulty setting boundaries growing up was because there weren't a lot of boundaries in my household growing up. Um, Now we didn't act out a lot, but there wasn't like a set bedtime. Boundaries around junk food weren't really enforced. Um, even boundaries about how I treated my brother. I mean, looking back, I was pretty mean to him a lot of the time. So sometimes I was punished, but even the punishments didn't. They weren't that severe, and they didn't hold. So I do think I learned poor boundaries from my parents, even with all their good qualities. So that's something that I've had trouble setting in my romantic relationships or with my son. um, I realized, I had never like put a structure in place for my son, and actually, Faisal helped me with that because he had created a pretty tight structure for his parenting. um, so yeah, rules and boundaries is not something that come natural for me. And so I think that's why, that's a big part of why I entered into, kind of codependent relationships. And I was always afraid that if I set boundaries about how I was treated, um, I would lose the love and attention and validation, reassurance that I wanted. That's the difficulty that nice guys have with boundaries, is that it's going to cut off uh, their emotional supply. It's like Faisal said, they have to be retrained to understand. Actually, boundaries are going to help you get your needs met in a more sustainable way.
Yeah.
It communicates so much. I mean, as you were saying, Ari, I was like, yeah, I was relating to all of that. But boundaries communicate so much. One of the things that boundaries communicate is standards. That's what standards are. They're just really enforced high boundaries.
Well, or you said structure, and I like that word because it is the masculine is structure. So a boundary, setting a boundary, is a masculine act. It's holding structure. It's a container. The feminine, is chaos, and so she's going to push against the structure to look for weaknesses, to look for cracks. The stronger our boundaries are, the more safe she feels, which is like Faisal. If you say, I after 10 p.m. I don't talk on the phone anymore, she hates it because, you know, in her femininity of flow, and she's having a great time and she wants to connect deeper, and you're putting a restriction on that. She hates that, but at the same time, it gives her a container that she can trust. And since most nice guys, we have a very well developed feminine side, and we don't have a well developed masculine side to us. We're not good with structure. We're not good with setting a boundary. And I think that the the integrated man is one who is comfortable with setting boundaries, knows what his limitations are, knows what he'll accept and what he won't accept, what he'll tolerate and what he won't tolerate. And he lets people know that this is what I'll tolerate, this is what I won't. One of the things I often tell my clients is we teach people how to treat us. And if I don't say no to something, say bad behavior, then I'm essentially saying yes to it. And if I'm saying yes to it, then I'm training the other person that this is acceptable for me. I will tolerate your bad behavior, whatever that is, if it's name calling or yelling or swearing or whatever. But the boundary is saying these are things that I won't tolerate. These are non-negotiables for me. And this last week, I was at a men's retreat with John Wineland, and he said something that really struck me. He said, um, "Boundaries without consequences. A boundary without a consequence is codependency." And I loved that because
Yeah.
it talks about the consequence. And I think oftentimes we will set boundaries with somebody. I won't tolerate XYZ, but we don't have a consequence. And what I've been teaching guys more recently, as I've been working with them since I got back, is that To set a boundary, you start with the consequence. Okay. I will hang up the phone if you continue to yell at me. I will leave this room if you continue to talk to me poorly. So the consequence, starting with the consequence and then the boundary, lets the person know what's going to happen right up front. And then if they continue with that, then you follow through with the consequence. And you may need to, so if it's more than just setting a boundary, it's setting a consequence for the breaking of the boundary. Anyway, that's just something that I've been thinking about more recently of, it's really easy for me to say, well, I won't tolerate you, swearing at me. Okay, but what's the consequence?
That's such an important point. It's the follow through, right? It's and I'm
just more of the structure. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's also consequence. And in my life, I know women have tested me so much, but I would say the biggest test for me has been my kids. Children have a special button on parents and they know exactly which one to press, right? And I actually, the last several months, I actually got support. I actually hired a coach to help me better parent. I think I'm pretty decent at parenting, but I wanted to take it to the next level. And I remember my son, so he lives with me, the older son lives with me, and I have got principles and rules in place. And those rules, and even if I have a lover that stays over, I enforce the same rules. And the rules are a safeguard for all of us. It's not just for me, and it's a safeguard for all of us. I don't want constant like phone use everywhere. So, for example, if you're watching a movie time, all of us put the phone away. There's no phone walking around constantly with the phone. I have really strict rules about the phone. And I remember when my son goes to his mom, she's very relaxed about, rules and boundaries. When my son comes back and he says, I like it being here. And even when my younger son comes here, he says, I know they're strict. I know there's rules. He said something to me and he was lying in bed and he says, I'm really thankful for them because it makes me be a better man. It stops me going towards really bad things. And there's that limit. And I see that because I see that in you. And it doesn't mean I do it 100%. I get it wrong too. I sometimes, fail on my boundaries. And that's something that I'm practicing is to make sure there's consequences and make sure that I follow through. If I said something like right now, today, as we're recording this podcast, I took away his phone for 2 days because he did two things that I said not for him to do. And he did those. And I said, look, that's a consequence of 2 days without phone. And that's what's going to be. And he knows that. And he said something to me and it really shocked me. He said to me, Dad, when you're weak, I don't respect you. Mm-hmm. I was like, ow, but it's so true.
Yeah. Children, pets, and women are all part of the feminine structure. So children are oftentimes going to come, or they're going to have a whole lot more feminine energy, whether they're boys or girls, they're going to have more feminine than pets, the same thing. But that the consequence then is, what the consequence, like your son knew what the consequence was. He did it anyway. And then you followed through with the consequence. And he said, I can trust that. I know what I'm going to get. And I think that's that trustability that comes into play for the feminine energy that needs a container for that wild flow, that artistic dance and creativity and all of that kind of stuff that the feminine represents oftentimes. And to have a container for that is the structure that we provide, as whether I'm a parent or a partner or a pet owner. I'm saying this is what's okay and this isn't what's okay, not from being a tyrant, but from a place of love. I love you so much that I'm not going to let you play in the street.
I love you so much. I'm going to put, like you said, I'm going to put these into place because they're coming from a higher place. They're not coming from, And I like Ari's point as well, because, Ari said, we're so afraid of losing things. Like, for example, when guys want to enforce a boundaries on dates or something like that, because they get the date, they're so afraid of that, they might not get another option and get another date again. So what I'll do is I'll just settle with that behavior. So a lot of nice guys settle with substandard behaviors because they're not enforcing that boundary. But what they don't realize is that when you set in boundaries, when you set standards, women find that much more attractive, because the average guy, most guys don't do that.
Yeah.
But you get substandard behavior when you don't set good boundaries, and you get substandard partners in general.
Yeah.
If you lower your standards, you're going to get lower quality. And to have higher standards, you might have to weed through more women. I mean, that's what I'm finding. I'm not going to just get into a relationship just because I haven't been in one in a while. And so part of that is being able to be okay with being alone, which is something that a lot of nice guys struggle with. And
Yeah.
being able to meet your own needs, or being able to meet your needs in other ways.
And she's hot and sexy, and she gives me good sex. That's one of the reasons why I see men just, to let go of all their standards, all their boundaries, all their self-respect, because she gives me good sex. She's so hot. I can't get another girl like that. It's that, I always say, look, boundaries is very scary, because it opens up for you the risk of that loss. People go, and rule one, I always say, I've got 12 laws. Law number one is be willing to walk away, because if you're not willing to walk away, it will have a power over you.
Now, here's a flip side of the boundaries, is that we also have to respect our partner's boundaries and other people's boundaries within ourselves. So it's much easier to be like, I'm going to set the standard and she's going to follow along, and I'm going to, but when it comes to somebody else setting boundaries with us, that's when we sort of drop down into our lower childish state. And it's like, you're not going to tell, you're not the boss of me. You can't tell me what to do.
It's such a good point. I love that point.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring that out, that I think that it's also something consciously, like my wife, and I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But I know that this has happened in the past where she said something and she set a boundary with me, and I just have to go, okay, that's her boundary. Like, I need to respect that. Like, it really has nothing to do. It's not affecting me in a completely negative way. Maybe it's a limitation or something along those lines, but I just have to respect the fact that this is her boundary. Same thing, with my daughter. Sometimes, it's like she doesn't want me to come into her room. Okay, well, I have to respect that boundary. So it goes both ways. I think that that's a piece I wanted to make sure that we talk about here, is that it's one thing, nice guys are terrible at setting boundaries, and we're terrible at respecting boundaries.
Yeah. Such a good point. And that's one of the things I noticed as well, is because they are so loose with their own boundaries, and then they have this covert contract or expectation. Oh, you're going to be loose with your boundaries, so I expect it to lean. I expect it to cave in. I expect you, and it's a shock, when they say no is a no. And I when I started spending more time with Dr. Glover, I love his no's. They're very strong. He'll give you a very strong no, and he'll be very direct about it. And it's like, whoa, it's a bit of a shock. And I respect all men and women who have strong, and they clearly say and they enforce it, and there's a consequence. Because again, it just reminds me of, like, hey, Faisal, you need to pull yourself up here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I wrote 5 points about boundaries, so I'll just kind of read these really quickly here. And so number one is, she needs to know that you can say no to her. Going back to the idea of structure, she needs to know that you can say no to her. And one of the reasons she needs to know that you can say no to her is so that she can trust when you're out there and she's not with you, that you can say no to the other woman. Number two is that boundaries are an act of love, that they're always coming from a place of what's best for yourself and others. And number three is boundaries without consequence is codependence. Number four, we teach people how to treat us. And number five, boundaries are setting the tone and taking the lead. So there you have it. 5 little points. Thanks again for being part of the Nice Guys Show. Please, if you're watching us on YouTube, remember, like, subscribe. It really helps us reach out to more men who need support. And if you're listening to us on one of your favorite platforms for podcasts, be sure to subscribe and rate us there as well. Also, go to theniceguysshow.com to get on our mailing list. And if you like this episode, check out the podcast that we did. It's called She's Mad at Me Again, How Nice Guys Can Escape the Doghouse in Relationships. This is episode number 28. Thanks again for taking the time to tune in, and we will see you all next time on The Nice Guy Show.
You've been listening to The Nice Guy Show with certified Nice Guy recovery coaches Ari Graff, Chuck Chapman, and Faisal Kokar. Be sure to subscribe to this channel so you can listen to our latest episodes and visit us on www.theniceguysshow.com. If you have any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, send us an email at support@theniceguysshow.com. Thanks for listening.